What happened about a year and a half after this conversation with the presiding overseer in my kitchen, I was talking to him after a meeting at the Kingdom Hall. Just, a chit-chat conversation and probably about one or two scriptural things. Maybe I'm just guessing because I can't remember the gist of the conversation. I just remember the end of it. And he said to me, well, would I be willing to appear before a panel? And so readily I agreed, yeah. In my mind I'm thinking, yeah, finally at last opportunity for the elders to question me on what I believe. And unfortunately for me, it took a couple of days for the penny to drop that I had actually agreed to appear before a judicial committee. What had transpired during the year and a half earlier, I'd voiced my complaints really to the presiding overseer, to circuit overseers, about certain things that were being taught that I knew were not right. The teaching on the 144,000, the same circuit overseer who had, in my older congregation, given 5 pieces of handwritten paper, I'd actually, in this new congregation where he visited again, I went out on a ministry and worked with his wife, and I spoke to her about this symbolic 144,000. And I did that, I believe, at the direction of Holy Spirit, because she was one of these secret anointed ones in hiding, in the closet, anointed. So I spoke to her about it, and she obviously told her husband, and as it transpired, the circuit overseer reported me to the presiding overseer. And all this came out at the judicial hearing, because he threw it at me that I had been teaching others in the congregation, this 144,000 teaching, and I said, look, I came straight to you and told you that I didn't no longer believe this teaching. And all in all, I'd spoken probably to a handful of brothers and sisters, and that was as far as it went. So the presiding overseer tried to pin it on me as apostasy, but he couldn't do it. There was another instance with a circuit overseer, Jeff, an old circuit overseer actually. He'd come back to my new congregation just as a regular visiting speaker on a Sunday. And when I knew he was coming, I prepared some writings, and I'd handed them to him also. He had actually been the circuit overseer that was at my pioneer school. So he knew of me. He knew that I had a spiritual head on my shoulders, and I felt that he would have taken my writing seriously, which is why I gave it to him. My whole agenda really was not to cause division in the congregations, to be teaching in the congregation, but I had tried to reach the leadership of the organisation. I tried to reach the governing body with my thoughts and ideas on the symbolic 144,000, but it nearly got me disfellowshipped. But what happened with me being hauled before a judicial hearing, I had commented in a Watchtower study on John chapter 10:16. It was the same conversation I'd had earlier with the circuit overseer when I handed him my original 5 pieces of paper. I pointed out John chapter 10 and verse 16 about the other sheep. Who did the first century Christians believe these other sheep were? They would have believed initially that the other sheep were Gentile Christians. And even like Matthew 24:14, the good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations. Christ spoke those words, and in the minds of the disciples, they would have originally perceived that to be Jews and Gentiles from all nations. And it was only until after 36 CE they would have understood that it was actually Gentiles, literal Gentiles, not proselytes, but Gentiles, uncircumcised Gentiles. So, bringing that forward to our time, you know, the organisation was really wrong to say that John 10:16 applied to an earthly class. John 10:16 applies to anointed ones who are not of natural Israel.